pleasure to welcome back to the program our good friend Frank Gaffney, the founder and president of the Center for Security Policy. Hey, Frank, before we talk about the State Department and whether it's working against the president and the efforts he's been making to drain the swamp, I want to ask you about North Korea. I mean, late yesterday, the word came down that new intelligence is showing that North Korea is now less than a year away from being able to put a nuke on a missile, and a missile that could reach the United States of America. And I want to know where we should go with that information now that we know that it's not 4 or 5 years, as we thought just a short time ago, but perhaps less than a year. Frank?
Lars, I apologize. I hate to be the bearer of bad news,
yes,
but I don't think it's a year away. I think it's got the capability now. We know it's got the capability to range parts of the United States, like Alaska, with missiles that it's already tested. There's some discussion as to whether they've got the ability to put a warhead on one that would not burn up in the atmosphere, but I'm pretty sure that they can buy one from their friends in Russia or China if they need to. But the bigger point is this, and I believe we've discussed this before, they have the capacity to put satellites into space. In fact, they have 2 of them up there orbiting the Earth right now, including overflying this country regularly. And if you have that capability, you have the inherent capability to have something that goes up, as they say, come down, or alternatively, simply, if it's got a nuclear payload on it, detonate in space over our country.
And you and I,
that creates electromagnetic pulse, and we're done.
Well, you and I have discussed the fact that with an EMP, actually the ideal place to set it off is a couple of 100 miles up, right?
Right where those satellites are operating. Exactly. And that's why I think this notion that, we're really going to have to get serious about this a year from now is wrong. It's whistling past the graveyard. We've got to get serious about this now. In fact, it's past time. And the idea that somehow the Chinese are going to pull our chestnuts out of the fire is becoming more and more untenable by the day. And this is a place to segue, if I may, to a problem that Donald Trump is having. I think he knows that. I think that's one of a number of things he knows, that his his State Department, our State Department, his Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, and the people working for him, the Foreign Service officers, the civil servants, and so on, they believe something very different on almost all of the major national security issues of our time, and they are actively working, it appears, at cross purposes with this president to undermine his presidency, and I'm afraid to put us in greater jeopardy from these kinds of bad actors, North Korea being just one of them, rather than diminishing the threat they pose to us.
So just so we're clear on this, it's the State Department bureaucracy and not Tillerson, too. Or are you saying that Tillerson himself is working at cross purposes to the president?
I will tell you this. Some of it's unclear, but some of it is now increasingly clear. We are now watching this president engaging in active fight, I guess is the only way to describe it, against his Secretary of State not abiding by his direct orders, notably on apparently an order from the president telling him to give him options for this Iran compliance exercise. And what we're looking at, Lars, I'm afraid, is many examples of this kind of activity at odds with the president's desires and instructions.
But tell me this:
from the Secretary himself.
Why would somebody?
Department bureaucracy.
Okay, but Frank, why would somebody agree to serve as Secretary of State, the foreign policy arm of the president, and then decide to work at cross purposes to the president? I know he has to have some latitude to use his own judgment, but if the president tells him to do something and he doesn't do it, I would hope that the president decides to fire him if necessary. And maybe they need to send Scaramucci over from the White House when he's done cleaning out the swamp at the White House and send him over to the State Department and start figuring out, are you folks with the program? If you're not with the program, you're gone.
I think there's 2 explanations for what's going on, Lars. One is that when you hire a billionaire who ran a very large multinational company, ExxonMobil, for a long time, you're dealing with somebody who's accustomed to having things his way, and not necessarily the ideal subordinate. That's point one. Point two is I believe that the State Department has remained populated by people who are not supporting this president. They're Obama holdovers or they're Foreign Service officers who are aligned with the Obama administration. So even if Rex Tillerson himself were not hostile to the president or were not determined to be insubordinate, I'm pretty sure that all that he's getting from his subordinates is, policy approaches and obligations or instructions, shall we say, that are going to be at odds with the president's policies. And it's got to be, as you say, a time of cleaning out, draining the swamp, starting in literally a big part of it, which is known as Foggy Bottom in Washington.
Well,